Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves stepping quietly into the shadowy corridors of medieval Europe. Imagine yourself there. The air cool, scented faintly of old parchment and burning candle wax. Lanterns flicker, casting dancing shadows on walls adorned with intricate tapestries. Outside, crickets chirp a slow rhythm, almost as if aware that within these stone halls lies knowledge kept secret for centuries. Now I know what you're thinking. Medieval times and science don't exactly go hand in hand, right? You're probably imagining knights jousting, plague doctors wearing creepy masks, and peasants munching stale bread. And to be honest, you probably won't survive this little trip into the past. Without Wi-Fi or coffee, medieval Europe was rough. But don't worry, tonight we're safely exploring from the comfort of our cozy blankets. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and what time it is right now. Let's connect our worlds across the sleepy YouTube universe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking silently through a hallway lined with heavy oak doors, each one hiding secrets you can scarcely imagine. Tonight isn't about knights or kings, though. It's about the forgotten figures who studied the stars, brewed remedies, and whispered discoveries into the ears of history. Women whose contributions were quietly erased by scribes and historians. It's about shadows, soft, flickering shadows, where brilliant minds worked quietly beneath patriarchal structures determined to silence them. The medieval era, stretching roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, is often painted in broad strokes: religious superstition, feudal lords, epic battles, and relentless plagues. But beyond these well-worn stereotypes lies a more nuanced truth, one filled with quiet innovation and whispered rebellions. You see, despite the overarching control of powerful institutions like the church, medieval Europe wasn't just an endless dark age. Learning flourished in hidden corners, whispered between cautious lips, kept alive in abbeys, convents, and private gardens. Yet within this structured society, women faced a particularly rigid set of rules. It wasn't just frowned upon to pursue intellectual pursuits, it was dangerous. Openly seeking scientific knowledge could easily label a woman as suspicious, unnatural, or even worse, a witch. But human curiosity is a stubborn thing, isn't it? And brilliant minds rarely follow rules, especially when those rules make about as much sense as medieval bathing habits. Did you know people believed bathing too often could actually harm your health? So yeah, hygiene and gender equality both struggled back then. Still, even in such a restrictive environment, women found ways around barriers, defying their limited roles quietly, cleverly, persistently. They scribbled notes under candlelight, cultivated medicinal gardens in secluded cloisters, and charted celestial paths from the secrecy of their chambers. These hidden figures weren't always alone either. Sometimes their work was recognized, even respected, but usually only privately, behind closed doors or whispered in quiet reverence. Historians still argue whether medieval society was genuinely hostile to women scientists, or merely indifferent. Either way, their voices were systematically suppressed or conveniently ignored. Much of their groundbreaking work was attributed to anonymous male authors or considered mere folklore. Over the centuries, their identities faded into obscurity, their achievements casually reassigned or dismissed. It wasn't maliciously conspiratorial necessarily, though let's be honest, the medieval patriarchy wasn't exactly winning awards for equality, but more a matter of social inertia, complacency in keeping women neatly contained in their expected roles. Tonight, though, you'll gently brush away layers of historical dust to uncover these hidden women, lighting candles to reveal their faces, their struggles, their triumphs. You'll meet figures like Hildegard von Bingen, a brilliant abbess who not only composed divine music but also penned influential medical treatises, and Trotula of Salerno, whose pioneering work in gynecology and women's health offered groundbreaking insights, though her name was deliberately obscured for centuries. You'll discover women whose contributions ranged from astronomy and alchemy to herbalism and botany, whose quiet perseverance laid foundations for later scientific revolutions. As you walk these shadowy halls, each flickering candle casts light upon forgotten manuscripts, hidden gardens, and clandestine laboratories, places where history was quietly shaped and just as quietly overlooked. But tonight we're reclaiming their stories. Each candle you light, each shadow you illuminate, brings you closer to a truth that deserves recognition. Medieval women weren't passive bystanders or silent shadows. They were pioneers, innovators, rebels in their own quiet ways. And while history loves celebrating the loud, flashy discoveries, looking at you, Galileo, it often misses the subtle, persistent contributions whispered quietly in the background. Before we journey further into their lives and discoveries, take a moment to imagine one of these women, quill in hand, leaning over a parchment. Her hair tucked beneath a simple cloth cap, ink stains on fingertips that tremble with excitement, or perhaps nervousness, knowing what she writes might never bear her name. Imagine the bravery, the frustration, the sheer determination in that moment. And now, imagine the thrill of knowing you're about to hear stories no textbook has ever fully told. Ready? Then hold your candle steady, breathe gently, and step softly with me. There's plenty more hidden just around the corner. You find yourself walking along a soft gravel path now, the rhythmic crunch of pebbles beneath your feet oddly soothing. Twilight settles over lush gardens enclosed by high stone walls covered in ivy, creating a gentle sense of intimacy. Here, the air is rich with scents you can't quite identify, mint, rosemary, lavender, mixed with something earthy and wild. This garden isn't ornamental, it's medicinal, practical. It's the private sanctuary of Hildegard von Bingen, a woman whose legacy reaches out like trailing ivy, quietly wrapping around history. Let's pause and picture her clearly. Hildegard, an abbess living in the 12th century, stood quietly yet defiantly outside societal norms. She was a mystic, composer, theologian, healer, and scientist, essentially the medieval equivalent of an overachiever. If Hildegard lived today, she'd probably have a best-selling herbal medicine blog, host a wildly popular mindfulness podcast, and still find time to drop an ambient album or two. But here, in medieval Germany, she navigated her pursuits under careful scrutiny, cloaked by the protective walls of the convent. Her medicinal garden is her quiet rebellion. At first glance, it looks like just another serene cloister garden, tidy rows of herbs and flowers growing calmly. Yet each plant here carries a secret, a healing purpose carefully documented in Hildegard's manuscripts. Rosemary isn't just a culinary herb. It sharpens memory, stimulates the senses. Sage doesn't just flavor dinner, it calms sore throats and purifies wounds. Lavender, aside from making linen smell fresh, eases anxiety and ensures peaceful sleep, handy for stressful medieval days of avoiding accusations of witchcraft. Hildegard's extensive writings detail the subtle interactions between plants and the human body. These texts were so insightful that scholars still reference her observations today. Historians continue debating just how influential Hildegard was to the medical field, but most agree she brought remarkable clarity and innovation to herbal medicine. Her book, Physica, meticulously describes properties and uses of nearly 230 plants. Imagine a medieval Pinterest board, but significantly more scientific. As you move through her garden, the leaves brush gently against your fingertips, cool and vibrant. Hildegard's knowledge wasn't entirely unique. Herbs and remedies existed long before her, passed down through generations, often orally from healer to healer. But she stood out by systematically documenting these folk remedies, formalizing knowledge traditionally dismissed or undervalued. Even more striking, she fearlessly explored not only physical healing, but the subtle connections between the human body, mind, and spirit, a holistic approach centuries ahead of her time. Here's a quirky fact. Hildegard didn't limit herself to herbs. She also wrote extensively about gemstones, claiming they held medicinal properties. For example, emeralds, she suggested, could cure headaches and eye troubles if worn on the body. Now, before you start taping your grandmother's jewelry to your forehead, remember, medieval medicine often blended genuine insight with whimsical folklore. Still, Hildegard's willingness to document such varied beliefs highlights a uniquely open-minded curiosity that defined her entire career. Walking deeper into the garden, the evening grows darker, shadows creeping slowly around plants and statues alike. You imagine Hildegard here in her plain robes, carefully harvesting herbs by the soft glow of dusk. Did she worry about the authorities, about the church's watchful eyes, skeptical of any woman claiming authority in healing? Probably. But she persisted, quietly confident her remedies and observations offered something valuable to humanity. Despite her accomplishments, Hildegard's knowledge sometimes placed her dangerously close to suspicion. Powerful women healers risked drawing attention. After all, in medieval Europe, women who knew too much were often branded witches. Thankfully, Hildegard's position as a respected abbess and visionary protected her from harsh consequences, but she wasn't immune from criticism. Some whispered her visions were delusions or worse, cunning manipulation. Historians today still debate whether Hildegard's visions were authentic mystical experiences, symptoms of migraines, or simply a smart way to package her revolutionary ideas within acceptable religious narratives. Whatever the truth, Hildegard carefully balanced her reputation as a holy woman with her genuine passion for science, allowing her to explore knowledge safely behind the shield of divine inspiration. But Hildegard wasn't content with medicine alone. She also composed ethereal, deeply moving music, chants designed to harmonize the soul, reflecting her belief in healing as both physical and spiritual. Listening to her compositions today is like drifting gently through a dreamscape, serene yet profound. Imagine her singing softly while she tended this garden, melodies floating gently over walls, calming both mind and body. If medieval wellness retreats existed, Hildegard would undoubtedly have run the most exclusive one, complete with aromatic herbs, gemstone massages, and serene chanting sessions. Still, Hildegard's true power lay in her ability to communicate. She corresponded with kings, emperors, and even popes, boldly offering advice and insights. Think about that for a moment. A woman, living in a time when most females had limited agency, confidently advising Europe's most powerful figures. She did so respectfully yet assertively, backed by a deep conviction in her insights and remedies. Yet despite her bold letters and groundbreaking manuscripts, her reputation faded after her death. Her work was quietly shelved, often misattributed or simply forgotten. But tonight, in the gentle hush of her garden, you're restoring Hildegard's quiet legacy, leaf by leaf. You lean closer, inhaling deeply. Lavender and rosemary fill your senses, mingling gently with twilight air. You realize Hildegard's garden is more than herbs. It's symbolic of women's quiet strength and enduring persistence. Like the roots beneath your feet, quietly extending, unseen but deeply powerful, Hildegard's influence subtly nourishes modern scientific understanding. So as shadows lengthen and darkness wraps gently around you, Hildegard's presence feels warmly comforting, her legacy resilient as ivy climbing steadily upward. Hold on to that feeling, the quiet strength, gentle persistence, and profound wisdom. It's the perfect way to drift deeper into tonight's history, softly illuminated by candles, whispered secrets, and gentle rebellions that shaped science in ways textbooks rarely admit. And speaking of whispers, let's follow them onward, deeper into tonight's journey. The path leads you gently away from Hildegard's peaceful garden, and slowly your footsteps guide you toward a different kind of quiet rebellion, one aimed not at the earth but at the heavens. Overhead, a velvety darkness spreads, broken by thousands of softly twinkling stars. They shine with a brilliance that modern city lights usually hide, but tonight you see them clearly. Each star seems to whisper a silent secret, and you feel a quiet kinship with the women who once gazed up at this same vast expanse. Now medieval astronomy might conjure images of monks hunched over manuscripts, or scholarly men debating the cosmos behind monastery walls. But women, they've long been quietly written out of the story, their names faded like distant stars barely visible through historical haze. Yet across Europe, behind convent walls and within private observatories, medieval women were studying the sky, charting planets, moons, and constellations with meticulous precision. Imagine yourself standing quietly on a convent balcony at midnight, a chill breeze rustling gently around you. At your side is an unnamed sister, her hands carefully guiding a simple astrolabe. She aligns its intricate discs with practiced precision, reading celestial movements in soft whispers so as not to wake her sleeping sisters. The convent below sleeps soundly, unaware that tonight's gentle astronomer is quietly defying centuries-old conventions. Astrolabes, by the way, were essentially the medieval equivalent of the smartphone, compact, multifunctional devices for tracking time, position, and celestial movements. Yet, despite how vital these instruments were, historians still argue whether women had legitimate access to astrolabes and other astronomical tools, or had to rely purely on shared information from sympathetic male relatives or secretive networks. Either way, they used whatever tools they could access, recording observations carefully, quietly, persistently. One such woman was Herod of Landsberg, who composed an extraordinary manuscript called the Hortus Deliciarum, Garden of Delights. Herod's manuscript contained a surprisingly detailed illustration of celestial phenomena, including diagrams of planets, seasons, and cosmic cycles. It's astonishingly sophisticated, like the medieval precursor to a NASA briefing deck, but created entirely within her abbey's quiet confines. You wonder, as you gaze upward, how these women must have felt staring into the vastness of the universe. Did the immensity frighten them, or was it quietly comforting, a gentle reminder of humanity's smallness in the grand scheme of existence? Maybe both. There's something both intimidating and calming about realizing your problems are insignificant compared to the infinite cosmos. A medieval version of staring blankly into your fridge at 2 a.m., overwhelmed by life, but also weirdly soothed by cold pizza slices. And here's something quirky you might not expect. Medieval women astronomers weren't limited to convents or religious institutions. Occasionally, noblewomen or even queens took quiet interest in celestial navigation, especially for practical purposes. Eleanor of Aquitaine reportedly showed curiosity about astronomy, probably inspired by her extensive travels and constant political intrigue. After all, medieval royalty spent more time on horseback and in ships than lounging comfortably on thrones. Knowing how to navigate by stars, at least to double-check that your advisors weren't accidentally sailing you off the edge of the earth, could literally mean life or death. Yet despite women's clear interest and practical use for astronomy, society wasn't particularly supportive. Women weren't allowed formal astronomical education, nor could they openly join scholarly circles. Universities remained stubbornly male-only clubs, but of course, walls built by men never entirely stopped curious minds. Just ask any teenager sneaking out after curfew. Women astronomers formed secretive networks, sharing discoveries through hushed conversations, carefully coded letters, and subtle allusions in manuscripts. They were pioneers of quiet rebellion, charting their intellectual territories beneath starlit skies, away from prying eyes. Historians still debate exactly how influential these networks were. Did these women meaningfully advance medieval astronomy, or were they merely passive observers, quietly absorbing knowledge without making substantial contributions? Regardless of scholarly arguments, it's undeniable that their mere participation quietly defied societal expectations and enriched the scientific tapestry of the Middle Ages, even if later historians conveniently forgot their threads. Tonight, you stand shoulder to shoulder with one of these forgotten women, feeling the subtle weight of her secret knowledge. She gazes upward, whispering gently about constellations and patterns older than history itself. Patterns passed down quietly, generation to generation, each woman adding her subtle observations. Her voice is soft, almost musical, blending seamlessly with the night's gentle whispers. Suddenly, you realize something comforting. These women didn't need fame or recognition to validate their work. The stars above provided all the validation they required, quiet witnesses to their discoveries, silently acknowledging their diligence. Fame is fleeting after all, easily overshadowed or forgotten. But these quiet moments beneath starlit skies remain timeless, resonating gently through history, inviting rediscovery by curious minds like yours. And as your eyes trace the delicate paths between stars, you recall Hildegard's garden, her careful documentation of herbal properties paralleling these celestial observations. Both women quietly challenged prevailing wisdom through meticulous observation and fearless curiosity. It's comforting, isn't it? Knowing that quiet persistence often outshines loud declarations. Science isn't always about shouting discoveries loudly from rooftops. Sometimes, it's about patiently charting stars beneath quiet skies, unnoticed yet profoundly impactful. Now your gentle astronomer friend silently lowers her astrolabe, satisfied with tonight's observations. The convent bells will ring soon, signaling dawn, pulling her quietly back to daily duties. Before she leaves, she whispers a quiet farewell, encouraging you softly, almost mischievously, to continue seeking knowledge, quietly or boldly, openly or secretly, whichever suits your circumstances. You watch her fade gently into the darkness, leaving you alone once more beneath the vast, twinkling tapestry. It's comforting standing here beneath stars that have watched generations of quiet rebels chart paths through history. Perhaps that's the real legacy of medieval women astronomers: gentle persistence, quiet resilience, and the calm certainty that knowledge, quietly gathered and gently shared, endures long after louder voices fade. With a soft sigh, you let your gaze drift downward, gently easing back into the quiet stillness of the night. The stars above have whispered their secrets. It's time now to explore more hidden stories waiting quietly for discovery. You slip away quietly from the starlit cloisters, moving gently through narrow cobblestone streets that twist and turn beneath shadowed archways. Soon, you find yourself in the warmth of southern Italy, in the bustling yet secretive medieval town of Salerno. It's a curious place, alive with quiet conversations, the soft clinking of glass vials, and the subtle scent of herbs and oils drifting through alleyways. Here, medicine wasn't just practiced. It thrived as an art and science intertwined, carefully passed from hand to hand, voice to voice. It's here in these whispered streets you meet a woman whose contributions to medicine are quietly revolutionary. Her name is Trotula of Salerno, though for centuries historians debated whether Trotula actually existed. Some suggested she was merely a mythical figure or even, hold your medieval outrage, a pseudonym for a male physician. Thankfully, modern scholarship gently brushed aside such skepticism, affirming Trotula as a very real, brilliantly insightful woman whose writings laid critical foundations for women's health care. You pause, smiling quietly at the absurdity of history's skepticism. Of course, recognizing a woman as a medical authority in the medieval world seemed absurd, about as likely as someone inventing pizza delivery in the 11th century, which sadly didn't happen for another 800 years. Tragic, really. But Trotula wasn't just quietly practicing medicine. She boldly documented it, leaving behind a legacy astonishingly ahead of her time. Imagine stepping into Trotula's modest clinic, softly lit by flickering candles. She moves quietly between patients, her presence calm and reassuring. Women from across Italy secretly visit her for remedies and advice they can't find elsewhere. Trotula's specialty: gynecology and women's health, areas largely ignored by male physicians who found female anatomy mysterious, intimidating, or downright uncomfortable. Trotula, on the other hand, approached women's health with straightforward empathy and genuine scientific curiosity. Her writings discuss topics like childbirth, menstruation, fertility, and even skincare. Yes, medieval skincare. If YouTube existed back then, Trotula's skincare tutorials might easily rival modern beauty influencers, minus the ring lights. Instead, she relied on natural ingredients: almond oil to soothe dry skin, rosewater to reduce redness, honey to heal wounds gently. Her texts even suggested bathing regularly, shockingly radical advice, given medieval Europe's general aversion to baths. Yet despite her detailed and practical advice, Trotula's work wasn't always welcomed openly. Medieval medical practice often merged with superstition and folklore, making straightforward medical explanations suspiciously modern. Female practitioners like Trotula risked drawing negative attention, their healing knowledge easily mistaken for witchcraft. Indeed, historians continue debating whether Trotula's openness about women's health might have sparked subtle hostility or suspicion among her male contemporaries, who felt uncomfortable relinquishing control over medical narratives. Quietly rebellious as always, Trotula wasn't deterred. She compiled her findings into influential texts known collectively as the Trotula Major, essentially a medieval bestseller. Her writings became the authoritative guide for women's healthcare throughout medieval Europe, secretly copied and circulated widely. Yet over the centuries, male scholars quietly stripped her name from manuscripts, replacing it with anonymous attributions or conveniently forgetting her altogether. It was easier to believe a man authored these insightful medical texts than accept a woman's scientific genius, a reminder of how history sometimes subtly erases women's contributions, as effortlessly as someone deleting an embarrassing Instagram story. But tonight, you carefully restore Trotula's rightful place in history. In her gentle clinic, you watch quietly as she listens carefully to each patient, providing not only remedies but genuine comfort and empathy. She understands something crucially overlooked by many physicians: healing involves compassion as much as science. It's a lesson modern medicine continues to rediscover, quietly echoing Trotula's centuries-old insights. Trotula didn't limit herself to physical remedies alone. Her texts also contained remarkably modern advice about mental health, acknowledging emotional well-being's direct influence on physical health. She advocated rest, balanced diets, and even leisure activities, quietly revolutionary concepts in medieval Europe, where most treatments involved dubious concoctions and earnest prayers. One particularly quirky fact about Trotula's practice: she openly recommended cosmetic care for women, arguing beauty treatments improved emotional health. In medieval Salerno, taking care of your appearance wasn't mere vanity, it was genuine self-care, a concept startlingly progressive for the era. Of course, medieval makeup routines weren't exactly Sephora-friendly. Lead-based foundations weren't just terrible for your skin, they could literally kill you. Thankfully, Trotula advocated gentle natural remedies, preserving beauty and health without accidental poisoning. As you linger quietly in Trotula's clinic watching her work, you feel a gentle sense of gratitude. Here was a woman who genuinely cared, not just for the physical body, but the entire person, blending science, empathy, and practicality. You can almost hear her whispering softly, "Knowledge should comfort, heal, and uplift, never frighten or control." Eventually, Trotula softly closes her clinic doors for the evening. Her patients leave quietly, their burdens eased, hopeful remedies tucked into their pockets. As the candles flicker gently in the darkened room, you reflect quietly on the enduring legacy of this remarkable woman. Though history quietly obscured her name, her contributions resonate powerfully, gently shaping modern medicine's foundations. Before leaving, you glance once more around Trotula's modest clinic, the quiet evidence of her dedication evident in carefully arranged remedies, handwritten manuscripts, and gentle whispers of healing wisdom. You recognize her gentle strength mirrored in modern nurses, midwives, and doctors, quietly resilient professionals dedicated to compassionate care. Stepping softly into the Salerno night, you carry Trotula's legacy gently forward, promising quietly to remember her name, to whisper it softly whenever history threatens to forget again. You glance upward, stars twinkling gently above, reminding you that quiet revolutions often start softly, barely noticed, yet their impacts echo profoundly through time. Feeling peaceful yet empowered, you continue onward, ready to discover more hidden stories waiting quietly ahead. You drift gently onward from Trotula's quiet clinic, your journey carrying you further into the secret spaces of medieval science. Now you find yourself inside a softly lit scriptorium, a quiet room where scribes sit hunched over desks, quills scratching gently against parchment, ink-stained fingers carefully crafting letters and symbols. It's late, the air thick with the scent of candle wax and old parchment, the silence broken only by soft rustles and whispered sighs. Here's where you encounter another kind of quiet rebellion. Anonymous women carefully contributing knowledge, their identities hidden beneath a veil of secrecy. You walk quietly between tables, watching closely as these scribes gently transcribe texts, copying painstakingly letter by letter, their handwriting neat and careful, anonymous yet profoundly meaningful. Anonymity wasn't unusual in medieval Europe. Many manuscripts, especially scientific or medical texts, had no author credited at all, partly because medieval scribes saw themselves more as transmitters of knowledge rather than authors. But anonymity was particularly useful for women who quietly defied societal norms by contributing intellectually. Signing their names could risk scandal or suspicion, accusations of impropriety, or worse, witchcraft. So instead, they let their knowledge speak silently, hidden beneath careful handwriting and patient scholarship. As you pause beside one of these scribes, a young woman carefully dipping her quill into ink, you notice a subtle intensity in her eyes. She's transcribing an herbal remedy, delicate illustrations accompanying careful instructions. Historians still debate whether manuscripts like this one, richly detailed and insightfully practical, were originally authored by women or simply transcribed by them. Regardless, their careful preservation of knowledge was quietly revolutionary. Imagine being a brilliant scholar, your greatest insights forever credited only to anonymous. Frustrating, certainly, yet also quietly heroic, a silent act of generosity, knowledge freely shared without expectation of recognition. Now here's something quirky. Medieval manuscripts often included margin notes, little commentaries scribes wrote to themselves. Some notes were straightforward, "The ink is terrible today," while others provided subtle glimpses into scribes' personal thoughts, "My hand hurts," or "This chapter is dreadfully dull." Occasionally, women scribes slipped quietly subversive messages into margins, gentle sarcasm aimed at male authors, clever jokes about tedious sections, or heartfelt expressions of frustration. It's oddly comforting knowing that even in medieval times, quiet rebellion and gentle humor thrived, scribes rolling their eyes silently through centuries. You wander softly onward, noting manuscripts filled with scientific observations about the natural world, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. While historians typically credit these texts to male authors, modern scholars increasingly recognize subtle feminine influences, careful, insightful commentary or innovations quietly woven within pages. Sometimes these subtle clues are unmistakable, mention of childbirth, female anatomy, or empathetic perspectives unusual for male scribes. Other times, it's subtler, hinted quietly through compassionate wording or detailed observations, unlikely without first-hand experience. You pause again, leaning quietly over another scribe's shoulder. She transcribes an astrological text, detailing planetary movements alongside predictions about weather, health, and politics. Astrology in medieval Europe blurred lines between science, philosophy, and superstition, though its practitioners took it incredibly seriously. But what's fascinating here is the quiet precision, the subtle clarity of her notes, suggesting the scribe understood astronomy deeply, possibly even correcting errors from the original text. This gentle act of scholarly rebellion might seem insignificant, like quietly correcting grammar on a friend's Facebook post. But in medieval times, challenging traditional knowledge, even subtly, was bold indeed. The quiet precision of women scribes gently reshaped scientific manuscripts, slowly correcting inaccuracies and guiding future scholars toward greater clarity. Historians continue arguing whether these anonymous contributions were deliberate acts of scholarly intervention or mere transcription errors. Yet it's clear medieval women scribes weren't passive copyists. They were thoughtful, insightful scholars subtly shaping texts, nudging knowledge forward quietly but significantly. It's a powerful reminder that revolutions don't always happen loudly. Sometimes they unfold gently, one carefully corrected word at a time. Now imagine quietly conversing with one of these scribes. Perhaps during a brief pause between pages, she whispers softly about her dreams, frustrations, or quiet triumphs. You discover she's proud yet humble, deeply aware her contributions will likely remain anonymous yet determined to preserve knowledge for future generations. It's quiet heroism, profound yet subtle, powerful precisely because it's unassuming. You notice something else as you continue through this quiet scriptorium. Manuscripts occasionally feature gentle illustrations alongside scientific texts. Plants carefully drawn, anatomical diagrams quietly accurate, celestial charts precisely rendered. Historians increasingly suggest women scribes weren't just copying texts, but also providing skilled, detailed illustrations. Their quiet, artistic contributions added clarity and beauty to manuscripts, enhancing understanding while silently asserting their intellectual presence. One last quirky tidbit before you leave. Occasionally, women scribes would subtly insert their own initials or secret symbols into manuscript borders, cleverly hidden within elaborate decorations. Imagine the gentle thrill of secretly claiming authorship, a tiny rebellion carefully concealed beneath intricate artwork, waiting quietly for discovery centuries later. It's medieval trolling at its finest, clever, subtle, quietly brilliant. You step gently back, surveying the softly lit scriptorium once more. Candles flicker quietly, illuminating faces absorbed in their work, their quiet rebellion gently reshaping history's narrative. It's easy in moments like this to appreciate anonymity's subtle power, knowledge quietly shared, subtly transformed, patiently preserved. You understand something profound. True scholarship isn't about loud declarations of authorship. It's about the quiet persistence of ideas, gently shared across generations, whispered softly yet enduring. As you exit the scriptorium into cool night air, your thoughts linger gently with these anonymous women. You promise quietly to remember their subtle bravery, their gentle rebellions etched invisibly across history. Their quiet courage inspires you softly, encouraging your own quiet pursuits, reminding you that knowledge shared, whether loudly or anonymously, is a gift of lasting value. And with that comforting thought, you move gently forward, ready to discover more quiet whispers of history waiting patiently just ahead. As you drift onward through the night, leaving behind the quiet scriptorium, you find yourself stepping gently into a shadowy realm filled with mystery, superstition, and whispered secrets. Alchemy. Now, if the first thing that pops into your mind is a wizened old man stirring a cauldron in a dark cellar, you're not alone. But tonight, we're quietly rewriting that scene, gently uncovering forgotten women whose roles in medieval alchemy have long been obscured. Alchemy, in its simplest form, was the medieval precursor to chemistry, concerned with transformation and transmutation, turning base metals into gold, seeking elixirs of immortality, or creating powerful medicines. Of course, medieval alchemy also flirted openly with magic and mysticism, making it particularly dangerous territory for women. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these risks, medieval women quietly joined alchemy's ranks, driven by curiosity, intellect, and subtle rebellion. You enter a dimly lit workshop now, candles flickering gently, shadows stretching long and strange across stone walls cluttered with glass vials, bubbling pots, and stacks of mysterious texts. The scent here is an intriguing mix of burnt herbs, sulfur, and old parchment. At a wooden table stands a woman quietly at work, carefully measuring ingredients, her eyes intense yet patient, her hands steady and practiced. This woman, like many alchemists, works quietly, part scientist, part mystic, entirely fascinating. Now, historians still argue fiercely about the real goals of medieval alchemists. Was alchemy genuine scientific experimentation, cleverly disguised beneath mystical language to avoid suspicion? Or was it primarily spiritual, symbolic pursuit, aimed more at transforming the soul than literal metals? The truth probably lies somewhere between the two, but for medieval women alchemists, practical applications, like creating effective medicines and remedies, were quietly revolutionary goals. One such woman was Mary the Jewess, sometimes called Maria Prophetessa. Though technically ancient rather than medieval, Mary's alchemical innovations profoundly influenced medieval practices. Her inventions included sophisticated distillation techniques and laboratory equipment still used today, such as the water bath known as a bain-marie, literally, Mary's bath. Yes, next time you melt chocolate gently in a double boiler, thank Mary quietly for her ancient wisdom, ensuring your desserts come out perfectly smooth. Mary's quiet genius survived centuries, subtly shaping medieval alchemical practices passed secretly among women. Medieval female alchemists carefully studied her texts, replicating experiments and gently pushing boundaries. Their quiet labors might have gone unnoticed, but the impact of their meticulous experimentation, developing tinctures, distillations, and innovative medicinal concoctions, was quietly revolutionary, often credited anonymously or attributed casually to male contemporaries. Another quietly influential alchemist was Isabella Cortes, an Italian noblewoman whose comprehensive work on alchemy, medicine, and cosmetics provided practical, accessible insights. Isabella boldly encouraged women to engage in chemical experimentation, providing recipes for cosmetics, perfumes, and remedies, alchemical creations designed gently for women's daily lives. If medieval TikTok existed, Isabella's homemade beauty remedies would likely dominate feeds, carefully guiding medieval followers toward perfect skin without dangerous ingredients. But alchemy's blend of science and mysticism created risks, especially for women. The church and authorities were suspicious of women dabbling in mysterious practices. Many quietly brilliant women risked being accused of witchcraft, their careful notes mistaken for sinister spells, their remedies branded dangerous potions. Imagine carefully distilling lavender oil, only to have neighbors whisper that you're brewing witches' brews. Medieval gossip could be alarmingly creative. Despite dangers, medieval women persisted quietly, driven by genuine curiosity and scientific ambition. Behind closed doors, they mixed substances, heated metals, documented experiments meticulously, sharing knowledge discreetly through careful networks of female practitioners. These quiet connections allowed women alchemists to thrive, their subtle rebellions passing unnoticed by patriarchal oversight. A quirky detail from medieval alchemy might amuse you. Medieval practitioners believed the moon influenced alchemical processes, timing experiments carefully to lunar cycles. Alchemists, especially women, traditionally associated with moon symbolism, worked quietly beneath moonlit skies, aligning their secretive practices with celestial rhythms. Modern science dismisses lunar alchemy as superstition, yet medieval women quietly harnessed moonlight's subtle influence to shape their experiments, a poetic, gentle rebellion against rigid scientific norms. Tonight, in this dimly lit workshop, you witness quietly persistent women carefully distilling substances, methodically recording findings, whispering theories softly to trusted allies. Their meticulous experiments subtly paved pathways toward modern chemistry, even if history rarely mentions them explicitly. Scholars still debate how significantly medieval women contributed to practical alchemical advances. Yet their quiet determination undeniably enriched the alchemical tradition, providing gentle yet critical innovations often overlooked by history's louder voices. As candles flicker lower, shadows lengthening gently across the stone walls, you feel quiet respect for these brave, anonymous women who embraced alchemy's mysteries despite inherent dangers. Their courage lay not in loudly proclaiming discoveries, but in quietly pursuing knowledge regardless of risk. True bravery often whispers rather than shouts, gently shaping history from shadows rather than brightly illuminated stages. Now imagine carefully holding one of their delicate glass vials, feeling its weight softly in your palm. Within lies a subtly fragrant liquid, perhaps lavender oil, rosemary tincture, or even a healing elixir carefully brewed beneath moonlight. It represents quiet ingenuity, gentle persistence, subtle rebellion, qualities essential not only to medieval women, but to anyone pursuing knowledge courageously, quietly, patiently. Finally, you set the vial down softly, the glass gently reflecting candlelight. You step quietly backward, leaving these alchemical women to their careful, whispered labors. Their secrets remain quietly safe, yet their gentle influence reverberates onward through time, subtly shaping modern scientific understandings. You move softly toward the workshop door, pausing briefly to admire their quiet determination once more. Alchemy's hidden heroines remind you gently that profound discoveries often emerge from shadows, quietly cultivated by persistence and gentle rebellion. As you exit softly into the cool night air, you carry their quiet bravery forward, eager to discover more whispered stories patiently awaiting your attention. You drift gently away from the alchemical workshop, stepping softly into a darker corridor of medieval history, one filled with whispered accusations and hushed fear. Here, the air feels slightly heavier, shadows deeper, the candles flickering anxiously as if sensing the tension. Tonight, you face the troubling yet crucial reality that women who quietly pursued scientific knowledge were sometimes labeled as witches, accusations that twisted innovation into something sinister. Imagine moving through a quiet medieval village, cobblestone streets bathed in pale moonlight, cottages silhouetted gently against the night sky. Everything looks peaceful at first glance, yet beneath that surface, whispers rustle softly like dry leaves, rumors quietly passed between villagers, accusations of dark practices, suspicions of witchcraft. Why, you might wonder, would medieval society fear women who sought knowledge, particularly medical or herbal remedies? The answer lies quietly tangled in superstition, fear, and control. In a time when understanding was limited and explanation scarce, the unfamiliar easily became threatening. Knowledge, especially wielded quietly by women, felt dangerously powerful, unsettling established hierarchies and traditions. So instead of recognizing their contributions, society often labeled knowledgeable women witches, branding their gentle remedies as sinister spells. The term witch itself conjures medieval stereotypes, women flying broomsticks, cackling over bubbling cauldrons. Yet real accusations were far subtler and more insidious. Consider a midwife whose herbal remedies quietly saved countless lives. One difficult childbirth, one unsuccessful remedy, and villagers might whisper suspiciously, was her knowledge supernatural, demonic even? Quietly helpful women could become scapegoats overnight, their carefully cultivated reputations shattered by hushed rumors. Historians still debate exactly how widespread accusations of witchcraft were during medieval times, often pointing out that witch hunts peaked later, in the early modern era. Yet medieval fears laid the groundwork, quietly linking women's knowledge with sinister suspicion. These whispers echoed forward, growing louder over time, yet their roots lay here, subtly embedded in medieval anxieties around women's quiet intellectual independence. Still, many women persisted bravely, continuing their quiet practice of science, herbalism, and medicine despite potential danger. Take Alice Keiteler, a wealthy medieval Irish woman accused of witchcraft partly due to her vast herbal knowledge and independent wealth. Though medieval courts eventually targeted Alice, historians suggest the real issue was her quiet independence, wealth, and influence rather than actual witchcraft. Her herbal remedies, carefully prepared and widely respected, suddenly became evidence against her. Alice fled Ireland, quietly disappearing from historical records, leaving behind a gentle mystery historians continue pondering. These quiet stories remind us subtly how easily knowledge can be misconstrued when fear overtakes reason. Imagine carefully crafting an herbal tea to cure headaches, only to have neighbors whisper fearfully behind closed doors about suspicious brews. Medieval gossip, remember, had more staying power than medieval soap, which, to be fair, wasn't setting a high bar. Yet here's something quirky about medieval witchcraft accusations. Women accused were sometimes believed capable of shape-shifting into animals, particularly cats, owls, or hares. Medieval Europe's cat obsession wasn't about cute pets but superstition and suspicion, quietly conflating women's gentle independence with mysterious feline powers. Cats, after all, were nocturnal, independent, and often defied domestication, qualities suspiciously similar to quietly independent medieval women. If you've ever watched your cat silently judge you at midnight, perhaps medieval paranoia wasn't entirely baseless after all. Moving gently through this quiet village now, you pass cottages where accused women lived, worked, and quietly healed their communities. Many faced quiet ostracization, their lives disrupted or destroyed by whispered accusations. Yet their resilience was profound, women continuing quietly to practice science, often driven underground, their remedies shared secretly, cautiously, defying suspicion with quiet courage. One quietly persistent reality: accusations didn't always lead to trials or punishments. Often, suspicion lingered subtly, never fully erupting but creating constant tension, fear, and isolation. Imagine always watching over your shoulder, quietly worrying your neighbors might misconstrue your careful knowledge. Quiet courage was necessary, not just bravery in danger but daily, gentle persistence in the face of suspicion, misunderstanding, and fear. You pause quietly now, gazing upward. Stars still shine gently overhead, the moon casting soft, silver light over cottages and fields. In this gentle moment you reflect quietly on women wrongly accused, not supernatural villains but gentle healers, quiet scientists, subtle revolutionaries bravely pushing boundaries. Their quiet courage resonates softly across centuries, a gentle reminder to challenge easy stereotypes, question whispered suspicions, and acknowledge quiet heroes forgotten by history. Standing quietly in moonlight, you silently honor their gentle bravery, promising quietly never to overlook quiet contributions again. Science, after all, thrives quietly as often as loudly, driven forward subtly by anonymous practitioners, careful observations, whispered experiments. Medieval women, despite suspicion, persisted quietly, heroines not loudly celebrated but quietly remembered, their gentle strength inspiring modern resilience. Slowly you leave the village behind, stepping gently forward toward brighter spaces. Tonight's darker moments quietly remind you how easily suspicion twists knowledge, yet they also highlight quiet resilience, the gentle determination women maintained, even amidst suspicion. Softly now you carry their courage onward, determined to honor quiet voices history long ignored. Your footsteps carry you quietly onward, away from whispers of suspicion, gently toward imposing structures of learning, medieval universities. As you approach these grand buildings, impressive stone halls, towering spires, and heavy wooden doors, there's a quiet dignity to them. Yet beneath their solemnity, you sense another kind of quiet rebellion, women patiently seeking knowledge just beyond universities, carefully locked doors. Medieval universities, famous institutions like Oxford, Paris, or Bologna, were the pinnacle of intellectual achievement. But these celebrated institutions had one glaring flaw: they quietly yet firmly barred women from entering. Imagine standing silently outside Oxford's heavy wooden gates, lantern in hand, gazing upward at illuminated windows, hearing faint murmurs of scholarly debates drifting softly outward. Yet these gentle whispers aren't for you, not because you lack talent, ambition, or curiosity, but simply because medieval society quietly dismissed women's intellectual capabilities. So what did medieval women do when universities turned them away? Did they accept this gentle rejection quietly, resigning themselves to limited roles? Of course not. Instead, they developed ingenious strategies, carefully circumventing obstacles, quietly pursuing education in alternative ways: private tutoring, secret study groups, convents, and quiet self-directed learning. Consider the quietly inspiring story of Héloïse d'Argenteuil, renowned not only for her famously tragic love story with philosopher Peter Abelard, but also her extraordinary intellectual brilliance. While Héloïse couldn't officially attend university lectures, Abelard privately tutored her, carefully teaching logic, philosophy, and theology. Héloïse quickly demonstrated intellectual prowess that easily matched or surpassed many male scholars, though medieval society carefully downplayed her contributions. Historians today still argue about Héloïse's intellectual legacy, some insisting Abelard shaped her brilliance, others suggesting Héloïse quietly influenced Abelard more than history admits. Yet Halois wasn't unique. Across Europe, countless women quietly pursued intellectual growth, subtly defying university restrictions. Imagine them studying by candlelight, carefully copied manuscripts spread gently across tables, whispering ideas softly in small, trusted groups. These hidden circles quietly became alternative universities, informal yet deeply meaningful, their gentle rebellions slowly reshaping medieval intellectual life. Convents often provided women crucial educational opportunities, serving as quiet sanctuaries of learning. Within convent walls, women accessed manuscripts, studied languages, theology, medicine, and natural sciences. While not formal universities, convents quietly functioned as educational institutions, often deeply respected within their communities. Abbesses quietly wielded significant intellectual authority, teaching novices carefully, cultivating quietly brilliant female scholars who, in turn, shaped medieval intellectual culture. Yet these quiet achievements rarely drew open recognition. Women scholars remained largely invisible to broader society, their gentle intellectual triumphs dismissed or overlooked. Quiet frustration likely simmered beneath gentle facades, women patiently enduring intellectual marginalization yet determinedly continuing their studies. Their quiet persistence wasn't dramatic or loudly heroic, yet it profoundly reshaped medieval intellectual history. Here's a quirky detail you might enjoy. Medieval universities often relied heavily on memorization and repetitive exercises. Imagine endless chanting of Latin phrases, enough to drive anyone quietly mad. Women, excluded from this rigid system, quietly developed alternative learning methods, careful analysis, practical application, quiet innovation. Medieval women often prioritized useful knowledge over purely academic theory, subtly challenging prevailing educational models. It's medieval intellectual rebellion, subtle yet revolutionary. Another quietly remarkable example is Christine de Pizan, a medieval writer who boldly advocated for women's education. While not directly barred from universities herself, Christine observed educational exclusion firsthand, gently yet forcefully critiquing patriarchal education models through her writing. Her book, The City of Ladies, quietly imagined a utopian society where women freely accessed education, gently revolutionary ideas, subtly challenging medieval norms. Now imagine quietly conversing with a medieval woman scholar, perhaps seated beneath moonlight in a private study. She shares softly her intellectual passions, gentle frustrations, quiet dreams for recognition. You realize quietly how profoundly courageous medieval women scholars truly were, not loudly protesting exclusion, but quietly circumventing it, gently reshaping society through patient persistence and intellectual brilliance. Yet historians still debate how significantly medieval universities' exclusion truly hindered women's intellectual progress. Some argue exclusion quietly fueled innovative learning alternatives, inspiring women's creativity, ingenuity, and quiet rebellion. Others insist exclusion significantly restricted women's intellectual growth, perpetuating gender inequality, quietly robbing society of potentially profound contributions. Regardless, medieval women persisted quietly, pursuing knowledge subtly yet courageously. As you step gently away from university walls, your lantern casting soft shadows, you carry forward quiet respect for these overlooked scholars. Their gentle defiance of educational barriers reminds you subtly that intellectual curiosity always finds quiet paths forward, despite obstacles or exclusion. Their quiet rebellion wasn't loud, yet it profoundly reshaped medieval intellectual landscapes, quietly laying foundations for future educational equality. Finally, glancing back quietly at medieval university walls, you promise gently never to overlook intellectual voices excluded by rigid institutions. Education thrives quietly as often as loudly, driven forward subtly by patient, persistent scholars, men and women alike. Quiet intellectual courage inspires profoundly, reminding you softly that knowledge belongs to anyone who quietly seeks it, even if history rarely mentions their names. With this gentle thought, you continue onward, quietly ready to discover more hidden stories patiently awaiting your attention tonight. Leaving the silent shadows of medieval universities behind, you drift gently toward another kind of quiet sanctuary, a softly glowing room, hidden discreetly behind heavy curtains and locked doors. Inside, gentle voices whisper quietly, candles flicker softly, casting warm golden hues upon women gathered discreetly. You've stumbled into one of medieval Europe's best-kept secrets, informal sisterhoods, and quietly thriving secret societies dedicated to preserving and advancing women's scientific knowledge. Now before you picture medieval sororities with secret handshakes or matching cloaks, though honestly that sounds delightful. These gatherings were subtler, quieter, yet just as powerful. Unable to openly pursue knowledge in universities, medieval women instead formed carefully concealed groups, quietly sharing medical remedies, astronomical charts, herbal recipes, and philosophical texts. These informal networks flourished discreetly beneath society's watchful gaze, gently empowering women who quietly refused intellectual isolation. Imagine yourself seated quietly among these women tonight, their faces softly illuminated, eyes bright with quiet excitement. Manuscripts and herbal samples pass gently between hands, each woman sharing insights, offering gentle corrections, suggesting subtle innovations. Though these gatherings rarely had formal structure, their quiet impact resonated profoundly, subtly influencing local practices and preserving knowledge otherwise forgotten or suppressed. Historians still argue precisely how organized these groups truly were. Some suggest informal gatherings occurred spontaneously, women sharing knowledge privately and casually. Others insist some sisterhoods had subtle yet deliberate structure, quiet leadership gently guiding scholarly exploration. Either way, these informal networks provided medieval women crucial opportunities for quiet intellectual growth, mutual support, and gentle rebellion against patriarchal restrictions. One notable example involved informal medical sisterhoods where midwives and healers quietly exchanged remedies and practices. Imagine softly whispered conversations, quietly detailing herbal preparations, childbirth techniques, and remedies carefully refined through generations. These groups quietly preserved crucial knowledge about women's health, childbirth, and family care, areas largely neglected or misunderstood by male-dominated medieval medicine. Quietly revolutionary indeed. Another gentle sisterhood involved herbalists and botanists quietly sharing plant knowledge, cultivating medicinal gardens discreetly, carefully documenting herbal properties. Imagine softly whispered advice about planting rosemary beneath moonlight or harvesting lavender gently at dawn. Medieval gardening tips subtly blending science, folklore, and practical wisdom. These informal botanical groups gently advanced medieval herbology, subtly shaping medical knowledge without drawing unwanted attention. Here's a quirky detail you might enjoy. Medieval women often encoded their herbal remedies using secret symbols or carefully disguised language to avoid suspicion or misuse. Imagine receiving a gentle recipe reading like a cryptic puzzle. Add 3 pinches moon's breath, 1 sprig dawn's whisper, secretly indicating precise herbal combinations. Medieval encryption meets gardening, quietly clever, gently subversive, subtly delightful. Yet sisterhoods didn't limit themselves solely to practical knowledge. Some gatherings quietly explored philosophical and spiritual texts, gently debating ideas about nature, morality, and human existence. Imagine softly whispered discussions about Plato's philosophy, Aristotle's ethics, or religious mysticism, intellectual explorations quietly defying assumptions about medieval women's intellectual capacity. These informal philosophical groups subtly challenged societal norms, gently reshaping perceptions about women's intellectual potential. Quiet sisterhoods also carefully preserved women's astronomical observations, subtly sharing celestial charts, lunar calendars, and star-based navigation techniques. Imagine quiet evenings beneath starlit skies, softly exchanging astrological insights, carefully noting planetary movements. Medieval women astronomers discreetly collaborated, gently refining knowledge subtly passed down through generations. Quiet astronomical rebellions hidden neatly behind polite smiles and carefully composed demeanors. But secrecy had risks. Medieval society quietly mistrusted private gatherings, suspicious of hidden knowledge or whispered conversations. Women involved risked accusations of witchcraft, suspicion, or social ostracization. Yet their quiet courage outweighed potential danger. These sisterhoods persisted gently yet bravely, subtly supporting each other, sharing knowledge quietly yet profoundly. True heroism, after all, isn't always loud. Often, it whispers softly, gently shaping history from hidden spaces. Tonight, seated gently among these quietly rebellious women, you feel deeply inspired by their subtle resilience. Their quiet sisterhoods weren't grand institutions loudly celebrated by history, yet their gentle impact was profound. quietly preserving knowledge, patiently supporting one another, subtly defying restrictions. These medieval women remind you gently that powerful revolutions often unfold quietly, without fanfare yet with profound, enduring impact. Before quietly leaving this softly illuminated room, imagine carefully receiving a small parchment containing herbal remedies, astronomical charts, or philosophical notes. A gentle reminder that knowledge, quietly preserved and subtly shared, survives longest. You softly promise to honor their quiet courage, gently passing their subtle wisdom onward, never forgetting women whose gentle rebellions profoundly reshaped medieval science. Finally, stepping quietly from the secret gathering into cool night air, you carry forward their quiet inspiration, eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting attention. Tonight's journey gently continues, guided softly by medieval women's quiet courage and gentle persistence. You wander gently onward, leaving secret sisterhoods behind, and now step softly into grander yet equally subtle spaces, medieval courts and palaces, places of quiet influence and hidden power. Here, within lavish chambers lit softly by candles and fireplaces crackling gently, powerful queens and noblewomen discreetly supported and encouraged the work of female scientists, quietly reshaping medieval intellectual landscapes. Royal courts might not seem like obvious centers of quiet rebellion, yet behind ornate tapestries and beneath elaborate gowns, medieval queens gently wielded considerable intellectual influence. Noblewomen, often quietly educated in languages, literature, herbalism, and even astronomy, used their subtle positions to foster scholarship, quietly patronizing scientific endeavors or discreetly funding women scholars. Though medieval society discouraged women's overt intellectual leadership, powerful queens skillfully navigated societal restrictions, quietly promoting science from behind velvet curtains. Imagine entering softly into one such royal chamber tonight. A fire crackles gently, casting warm golden shadows upon richly decorated walls. A queen sits quietly, surrounded by manuscripts, herbal remedies, astronomical charts, documents discreetly gathered from across her kingdom. Courtiers whisper gently, sharing knowledge and discoveries carefully collected by the queen's quiet patronage. Her subtle support isn't loudly proclaimed, yet its gentle power profoundly reshapes intellectual life. Consider Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of medieval Europe's most quietly powerful queens. Eleanor gently promoted scholarly exchange, subtly supporting troubadours, philosophers, and intellectual gatherings. Historians still argue exactly how deeply Eleanor influenced medieval intellectual culture, some suggesting her courts quietly reshaped European scholarship, others gently cautioning against exaggerating her impact. Yet her subtle patronage undeniably created spaces where ideas quietly flourished, including scientific insights subtly shared among noblewomen. Another quietly influential royal figure was Blanche of Castile, mother of King Louis IX. Blanche discreetly nurtured scholarly pursuits at court, quietly encouraging noblewomen's education, supporting translation projects, and gently patronizing scientific manuscripts. Medieval historians note Blanche's quiet intellectual authority, subtly encouraging women's education despite societal reluctance. Her gentle influence quietly reshaped medieval perceptions, slowly challenging assumptions about women's intellectual capacities. Royal courts also quietly supported medical science, particularly women's healthcare and herbal medicine. Noblewomen discreetly employed midwives, herbalists, and female physicians, quietly revolutionary practices subtly advancing medical knowledge. Imagine a medieval queen gently consulting her herbalist, quietly discussing remedies carefully tailored for royal family members. Such discreet consultations subtly legitimized female practitioners, quietly bolstering women's medical authority despite patriarchal resistance. Here's a quirky medieval fact. Royal courts sometimes quietly competed over intellectual prestige, patronizing scholars, translating texts, collecting manuscripts, like modern Instagram influencers subtly showcasing curated lifestyles. Queens gently participated in this subtle intellectual competition, quietly supporting science and scholarship, enhancing their courts' reputations through discreet patronage. Quietly revolutionary indeed, subtly reshaping medieval intellectual prestige without openly challenging societal norms. Yet queens' quiet patronage extended beyond scholarly competition, Many genuinely valued intellectual growth, discreetly promoting science out of sincere curiosity and conviction. Imagine medieval queens gently discussing astronomy, philosophy, or medicine, quiet intellectual conversations subtly shaping royal policies, influencing educational priorities, and quietly supporting intellectual exchange. Such subtle conversations profoundly impacted medieval scholarship, quietly nurturing scientific advancements without openly defying patriarchal restrictions. But quiet patronage had limits. Queens' subtle support rarely openly challenged institutional barriers to women's education. Universities remained closed, formal recognition elusive, quiet frustration subtly lingered beneath gentle facades. Yet Queens' subtle influence profoundly reshaped medieval intellectual culture, gently validating women's quiet scientific contributions, subtly encouraging intellectual pursuits despite societal restrictions. Historians continue debating exactly how influential medieval queens truly were, some scholars suggesting subtle patronage quietly reshaped medieval science, others cautiously tempering claims about queens' intellectual impact. Yet quiet influence remains undeniable. Queens gently created spaces where science quietly flourished, subtly nurturing women scholars, discreetly reshaping medieval intellectual landscapes. Tonight, seated gently within this royal chamber, you softly admire these quietly influential queens. Their subtle patronage wasn't loud or openly defiant, yet their gentle influence profoundly reshaped medieval science, quietly validating women's intellectual authority, gently promoting scientific exploration. True power, after all, often whispers softly rather than shouts loudly, subtly guiding history without dramatic declarations. Before quietly departing this royal chamber, imagine receiving gently from the Queen's hands a carefully preserved manuscript, subtly filled with herbal remedies, astronomical charts, or philosophical insights, a quiet reminder that subtle patronage profoundly impacts history. You promise gently never to overlook quiet contributions, subtly honoring queens whose discreet support profoundly reshaped medieval science. Finally, stepping softly from the royal chamber into cool night air, you carry forward their quiet inspiration, gently eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting your attention. Tonight's journey gently continues, guided softly by medieval queens, quiet courage, gentle persistence, and subtle yet profound intellectual influence. You drift gently onward, away from royal courts and quiet whispers of subtle influence, and soon find yourself standing softly at the edge of forgotten medieval libraries, vast repositories of knowledge, some preserved gently through centuries, others quietly lost beneath dust and neglect. Here, hidden among shelves stacked carefully with fading manuscripts, lie quiet clues to medieval women's scientific contributions, knowledge patiently waiting rediscovery. Imagine gently stepping into one such library tonight, its quiet halls softly illuminated by moonlight filtering through ancient windows. Dust motes dance quietly in silver beams, softly highlighting manuscripts carefully arranged on wooden shelves, their leather covers cracked gently with age. In these quiet spaces, women's subtle intellectual voices resonate softly, gently preserved yet mostly forgotten. Medieval libraries quietly served as vital knowledge centers, preserving texts on science, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. Yet many manuscripts written by or associated with women languished quietly, ignored or dismissed as insignificant. Imagine carefully pulling a forgotten manuscript gently from a shelf, its cover faded, pages fragile, and softly discovering subtle traces of women's intellectual influence hidden neatly within. Historians continue debating precisely how extensive medieval women's scientific contributions truly were, often hindered by sparse records or quiet erasure. Yet recent scholarship gently rediscovers women's subtle voices hidden quietly within manuscripts. Marginal notes, careful annotations, quietly innovative insights gently added by anonymous female scribes or scholars. Such discoveries softly reshape medieval intellectual history, quietly highlighting women's profound yet overlooked contributions. Consider carefully rediscovered manuscripts by medieval women like Hildegard von Bingen, Trotula of Salerno, or Herod of Landsberg, texts quietly influential yet subtly obscured over centuries. Imagine carefully turning manuscript pages, softly uncovering Hildegard's meticulous botanical observations or Trotula's groundbreaking medical insights, quietly profound knowledge gently hidden beneath layers of historical neglect. quietly thrilling discoveries, subtly reshaping understandings of medieval science. One particularly intriguing medieval manuscript quietly rediscovered recently is the Hortus Deliciarum, Garden of Delights, by Herod of Landsberg. This carefully illustrated text softly combines scientific observations, theological insights, astronomical diagrams, gently revolutionary medieval scholarship quietly compiled by a woman. Imagine gently turning its fragile pages, softly admiring intricate illustrations, subtle yet profound intellectual insights gently preserved despite centuries of neglect. Yet medieval libraries quietly hold more than famous manuscripts. Smaller texts, anonymous annotations, subtle marginal notes quietly preserve women's scientific insights. Imagine softly examining herbal manuscripts, carefully noting precise, detailed annotations gently correcting or enhancing original texts, quietly brilliant female scribes subtly shaping knowledge. Medieval women's quiet intellectual influence survives subtly yet profoundly within these forgotten library texts. Here's a quirky medieval tidbit. Medieval scribes sometimes quietly personalized manuscripts with playful margin illustrations or humorous notes, a subtle medieval equivalent to modern doodling. Occasionally, female scribes gently inserted quietly subversive humor into scientific manuscripts, clever jokes subtly mocking overly pompous male authors or gently critiquing tedious sections. Medieval libraries quietly preserve these delightful marginalia, subtle evidence of women's intellectual engagement and gentle rebellion. Yet many medieval women's manuscripts quietly disappeared over centuries, lost to fires, neglect, or deliberate destruction. Imagine softly standing before empty shelves, quietly reflecting on knowledge irretrievably lost, women's subtle scientific contributions quietly erased by neglect or indifference. Quiet sorrow gently mingles with gratitude for manuscripts carefully preserved, softly reminding you how fragile historical knowledge truly is. Tonight, standing gently within this medieval library, you quietly reflect on women's subtle intellectual resilience, knowledge carefully preserved despite neglect or dismissal, manuscripts quietly surviving centuries of obscurity. Medieval women scholars gently remind you intellectual contributions often quietly persist despite neglect, subtly reshaping history through careful preservation and patient rediscovery. Before softly leaving this quiet library, imagine gently returning rediscovered manuscripts carefully to shelves, softly promising never to overlook women's intellectual contributions again. Quiet gratitude fills you, subtly acknowledging medieval women's intellectual legacy, knowledge quietly preserved, manuscripts patiently waiting rediscovery, subtle intellectual insights softly shaping history. Finally, stepping softly from the quiet library into moonlit night air, you carry forward medieval women's quiet inspiration, gently eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting your attention. Tonight's journey continues softly, guided gently by medieval women's quiet courage, subtle intellectual resilience, and patiently preserved knowledge quietly reshaping historical understanding. Drifting gently onward from forgotten libraries, you now enter quietly into the quirkiest corners of medieval science, the fascinating fringes where experimentation, superstition, and innovation intertwined softly. Here, in gentle shadows beneath candlelit rooms, medieval women explored curious fields like astrology, herbal folklore, dream interpretation, and natural magic, quietly pushing scientific boundaries in areas often overlooked by men. Imagine softly stepping into one such cozy, dimly lit chamber tonight, walls lined carefully with shelves of dried herbs, glass vials, curious objects, and intricate star charts. The room smells gently of lavender, rosemary, and something subtly mysterious, medieval fringe science, where women quietly flourished, experimenting gently without strict rules or oversight. Candles flicker softly, casting golden light upon quirky, intriguing tools medieval women used quietly to explore life's mysteries. Medieval women quietly dominated fringe sciences, partly because these fields offered subtle freedom. Astrology, dream interpretation, herbal folklore allowed gentle experimentation quietly beyond rigid academic rules. Imagine softly observing a woman carefully consulting star charts, whispering gently about planetary movements influencing health, relationships, or crop harvests. Medieval astrology subtly blending observation, superstition, and intuition. Yet historians still debate precisely how seriously medieval women scholars viewed astrology. some suggesting gentle skepticism subtly coexisted alongside genuine belief, others insisting astrology profoundly shaped medieval women's worldview. Either way, astrology quietly offered medieval women intellectual engagement, gently validating curiosity and observation without openly defying societal restrictions. Another quirky medieval fringe science involved herbal folklore, remedies subtly blending practical herbal knowledge with gentle superstition or magical beliefs. Imagine softly watching a medieval herbalist quietly gathering plants by moonlight, gently whispering charms believed subtly to enhance remedies' effectiveness. While modern science dismisses magical aspects, medieval herbal folklore subtly encouraged practical experimentation, quietly advancing botanical knowledge through gentle trial and error. Dream interpretation was another quirky medieval fringe science quietly embraced by women, subtly exploring subconscious realms believed deeply meaningful. Medieval dream manuals gently instructed readers how to interpret symbols subtly, dreams quietly revealing hidden truths about health, future events, or personal challenges. Imagine medieval women quietly discussing dreams softly, gently interpreting symbols subtly influencing daily decisions. Fringe science quietly validating intuition and self-reflection. Medieval natural magic, a quirky yet fascinating fringe science, quietly attracted women intrigued by subtle natural energies believed gently manipulable for healing, protection, or practical purposes. Imagine medieval women softly experimenting with gemstones, herbs, or symbols subtly believed harnessing gentle natural powers. Fringe science quietly encouraging experimentation, curiosity, and intuitive understanding. One quirky medieval belief, gently embraced by women, involved using plant folklore subtly to predict future events or influence outcomes, like placing herbs beneath pillows, gently to encourage prophetic dreams, or quietly preparing herbal charms, subtly enhancing luck. While scientifically questionable, these practices quietly encouraged medieval women, gently experimenting with botanical knowledge, subtly deepening herbal understanding despite magical beliefs. Yet medieval fringe sciences subtly carried risks. Women experimenting quietly risked accusations of witchcraft, suspicion, or ridicule. Imagine gently practicing astrology or natural magic, quietly yet constantly worrying about neighbors' whispering suspicions. Medieval fringe scientists subtly brave, quietly pursuing curiosity despite societal mistrust. Tonight, softly observing medieval women quietly practicing fringe sciences, you gently appreciate their intellectual courage, quietly exploring quirky fields subtly ignored by men, yet profoundly validating women's intuition, curiosity, and experimentation. Fringe sciences quietly encouraged medieval women subtly pushing boundaries, gently experimenting beyond rigid societal rules, true intellectual rebellion quietly thriving beneath candlelit shadows. Here's a quirky medieval tidbit you might enjoy. Medieval astrology sometimes quietly influenced important decisions subtly, even royal marriages or political strategies. Imagine medieval queens gently consulting astrologers, quietly interpreting planetary alignments subtly guiding critical choices. Medieval fringe science quietly yet profoundly influencing historical outcomes beneath polite courtly facades. Before softly leaving this cozy chamber, imagine gently examining curious objects carefully. Star charts, herbal charms, dream manuals quietly revealing medieval women's intellectual curiosity and gentle experimentation. You promise softly never to overlook quirky yet profound contributions quietly made by women exploring medieval fringe sciences, gently reshaping historical understandings through subtle experimentation and quiet curiosity. Finally, stepping softly from candlelit chambers into cool night air, you carry forward medieval women's quiet inspiration, gently eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting your attention. Tonight's journey continues softly, guided gently by medieval women's quiet courage, subtle intellectual rebellion, and gentle experimentation quietly reshaping historical understanding. Leaving behind the gentle mysteries of medieval fringe science, you drift softly onward into a quiet scholarly debate, one that subtly shapes how history remembers medieval women scientists. Tonight, you wander gently through halls of academia, where historians argue quietly yet passionately about just how significant medieval women's contributions truly were. Softly illuminated lecture halls echo gently with careful questions, subtle disagreements, and whispered reinterpretations of history. Imagine softly stepping into one such scholarly hall tonight, quietly listening as historians gently debate medieval women's scientific roles. At first, voices whisper softly, respectfully exchanging careful arguments. Historians gently divided over interpreting fragmented evidence, subtly reconstructing women's intellectual legacies from scattered manuscript notes, anonymous annotations, or quietly rediscovered texts. Scholarly debate softly swirls around you, gently illuminating how historians carefully piece together women's quiet contributions. Some historians quietly assert medieval women significantly shaped scientific knowledge, gently emphasizing figures like Hildegard von Bingen, Trotula of Salerno, or Herod of Landsberg, whose subtle yet profound insights quietly influenced medicine, botany, astronomy, and philosophy. These historians softly insist medieval women were genuine scientific pioneers, gently reshaping medieval intellectual history despite patriarchal restrictions. Yet other historians softly caution against overstating medieval women's scientific influence, gently pointing out limited direct evidence, subtle ambiguities in manuscript authorship, or quietly questioning historical context. These scholars gently acknowledge medieval women's intellectual curiosity, yet subtly question their broader scientific impact, quietly arguing women's roles remained marginal despite personal accomplishments. This quiet scholarly debate gently highlights complexities in reconstructing medieval women's scientific legacies, evidence often fragmented, subtle, carefully pieced together from overlooked manuscripts, anonymous notes, or gently preserved texts. Imagine historians softly examining manuscripts, quietly deciphering subtle clues indicating women's intellectual influence. Handwriting, marginal notes, carefully detailed herbal observations subtly suggesting female authorship. One particularly gentle scholarly disagreement involves Trotula of Salerno's authorship. Some historians quietly argue Trotula genuinely authored groundbreaking medical texts, subtly reshaping medieval gynecological knowledge. Yet others softly suggest Trotula's name represented multiple authors, possibly male, gently challenging assertions about female scientific authority. Quiet debate softly continues, subtly reshaping historical interpretations gently yet profoundly. Historians also gently debate Hildegard von Bingen's intellectual legacy. Some scholars quietly argue Hildegard genuinely advanced medieval botanical knowledge, subtly influencing herbal medicine profoundly. Others softly caution against exaggerating Hildegard's scientific originality, gently suggesting her texts mostly compiled existing folklore or traditional remedies. Quiet scholarly debate gently underscores complexities in assessing medieval women's scientific originality. Yet these scholarly disagreements quietly enrich historical understanding, historians gently questioning assumptions, subtly reevaluating medieval women's intellectual roles through careful manuscript analysis, contextual interpretation, and subtle reassessment. Quiet scholarly debate gently emphasizes importance of careful historical inquiry, subtly reshaping medieval women's scientific legacies through patient examination, thoughtful questioning, and gentle reinterpretation. Here's a quirky medieval scholarly tidbit. Historians sometimes quietly analyze medieval handwriting styles, subtly indicating female authorship. Women scribes often gently develop distinctive handwriting, subtly differing from male counterparts. Imagine softly observing manuscript handwriting, quietly noting subtle differences, gently suggesting anonymous female authors, subtly reshaping medieval scientific texts. Quiet scholarly detective work, subtly reconstructing medieval women's intellectual contributions. Tonight, softly listening to scholarly debate gently surrounding medieval women's scientific contributions, you quietly appreciate historians, gentle patience, carefully reconstructing women's intellectual legacies from subtle clues, fragmented evidence, quiet manuscripts gently preserved, yet subtly forgotten over centuries. Scholarly debate softly reminds you history remains gently flexible, subtly reshaped by careful questioning, patient reinterpretation, and quiet reassessment, gently illuminating overlooked historical figures. Before quietly leaving this scholarly hall, imagine gently examining manuscript pages carefully, softly appreciating historians, subtle detective work, quietly piecing together medieval women's scientific contributions from anonymous annotations, gently preserved manuscripts, subtle historical clues. You promise softly never to overlook complexities, gently shaping historical understanding. Quiet scholarly, debate gently enriching medieval women's scientific legacies through patient inquiry, subtle reinterpretation, and gentle questioning. Finally, stepping softly from scholarly halls into cool night air, you carry forward medieval women's quiet inspiration, gently eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting your attention. Tonight's journey continues softly, guided gently by historians, careful scholarship, quiet reinterpretation, and subtle questioning, gently reshaping historical understanding. Gently stepping away from scholarly debates, you drift softly forward, quietly connecting medieval women's subtle achievements to a gentle yet powerful legacy still resonating today. Tonight, you softly wander through modern laboratories, hospitals, classrooms, and research centers, quietly observing how medieval women's whispered contributions subtly echo through contemporary science, gently shaping today's intellectual landscape. Imagine softly entering a quiet modern laboratory tonight, clean, sterile, softly humming with gentle efficiency. Scientists carefully conduct experiments, quietly recording observations, softly exchanging ideas. Yet beneath this modern tranquility lies subtle legacy, quiet scientific traditions gently influenced by medieval women's intellectual courage, subtle experimentation, quiet resilience. Take modern herbal medicine, gently thriving today in holistic clinics, pharmacies, or health stores. Imagine gently observing herbalists carefully preparing tinctures, teas, or remedies, quietly echoing medieval herbal traditions subtly preserved and gently refined over centuries. Modern herbal medicine quietly honors medieval women like Hildegard von Bingen or Trotula of Salerno, subtly continuing their gentle intellectual legacy through careful botanical study, patient experimentation, quiet herbal wisdom gently passed down generations. Midwifery, too, gently echoes medieval women's quiet contributions, midwives today quietly utilizing techniques subtly refined through medieval experimentation, herbal remedies gently passed down through quiet sisterhoods. Imagine softly observing modern midwives carefully assisting childbirth, quietly honoring medieval women's gentle legacy through subtle practices, quiet traditions, gentle wisdom softly preserved through generations. Yet medieval women's subtle legacy quietly extends beyond herbalism or midwifery, quietly influencing modern holistic medicine, gently validating intuitive, patient-centered care subtly championed by medieval women healers. Imagine gently observing modern holistic practitioners quietly blending scientific knowledge with subtle intuition. Modern medicine gently honoring medieval women's quiet belief in mind-body connection. Subtle holistic understanding gently preserved through quiet intellectual persistence. Astronomy today gently echoes medieval women's quiet observations. Modern astronomy quietly benefiting from subtle insights medieval women astronomers gently recorded beneath starlit skies. Imagine softly observing modern astronomers carefully charting celestial phenomena, quietly recognizing medieval women's subtle contributions. Star charts, observations, gentle celestial insights subtly influencing modern scientific understanding. Even modern laboratory techniques quietly reflect medieval women's subtle innovations. Distillation methods, laboratory apparatus, gently refined from medieval alchemical experiments quietly pioneered by women like Mary the Jewess or Isabella Cortes. Imagine gently observing scientists carefully using laboratory equipment, softly echoing medieval women's subtle alchemical discoveries. Quiet scientific legacy, gently preserved through patient experimentation. Subtle innovation quietly passed down through centuries. Yet historians gently debate precisely how extensively medieval women directly influenced modern science. Some scholars quietly insisting medieval women profoundly shaped scientific traditions, subtly yet significantly influencing modern understanding. Others softly caution against exaggerating medieval women's direct influence, gently emphasizing broader societal changes shaping scientific advancement. Quiet scholarly debate gently continues, subtly enriching historical understanding, yet quietly validating medieval women's intellectual resilience, subtly echoed today. Here's a quirky modern scientific tidbit quietly connected to medieval women. The modern bain-marie, or double boiler, gently derives its name from Mary the Jewess, ancient female alchemist whose subtle distillation methods quietly influenced medieval and modern laboratory practices. Imagine softly observing chefs gently melting chocolate using bain-marie, modern culinary tradition quietly honoring medieval women's gentle scientific innovation, subtly preserved through culinary traditions. Tonight, softly wandering modern scientific spaces, you quietly appreciate medieval women's subtle yet profound intellectual legacy gently resonating today. Modern science quietly owes subtle debts to medieval women scholars, herbalists, astronomers, midwives, alchemists quietly advancing knowledge despite societal barriers, gently preserving subtle intellectual traditions quietly shaping contemporary understanding. Before quietly leaving these modern scientific spaces, imagine softly acknowledging medieval women's gentle contributions subtly influencing today's intellectual landscape. You promise softly never to overlook quiet historical legacies gently shaping modern science. Medieval women's intellectual courage, subtle experimentation, quiet resilience gently echoed today in laboratories, classrooms, hospitals softly dedicated to advancing human understanding. Finally, stepping softly from modern laboratories into cool night air, you carry forward medieval women's quiet inspiration, gently eager to discover more whispered histories patiently awaiting your attention. Tonight's journey gently continues, guided softly by medieval women's quiet courage, subtle intellectual legacy, gentle scientific traditions quietly resonating profoundly today. As tonight's journey gently nears its end, you softly return full circle, revisiting quietly powerful moments encountered along your way. Medieval gardens whispering herbal secrets, cloisters softly echoing astronomical observations, quiet scriptoria preserving anonymous genius alchemical chambers gently humming with subtle innovation. Tonight, you gently honor forgotten medieval women scientists, softly acknowledging quiet voices profoundly reshaping history's subtle tapestry. Imagine softly walking again through Hildegard von Bingen's quiet herbal garden, plants gently whispering secrets, carefully cultivated remedies softly blooming beneath twilight. Hildegard's quiet wisdom subtly influenced herbal medicine, gently reminding you scientific revolutions often quietly unfold beneath society's watchful gaze, subtly reshaping knowledge through patient experimentation, quiet observation, gentle resilience softly enduring despite neglect. Quietly recall medieval astronomers softly charting celestial phenomena beneath starlit skies, women gently recording planetary movements, subtle lunar cycles, quiet star patterns subtly guiding navigators, gently influencing medieval and modern astronomy through careful observation, subtle dedication softly preserving celestial wisdom despite anonymity. Remember softly whispered gatherings of medieval women gently sharing scientific knowledge, informal sisterhoods quietly preserving herbal remedies, astronomical charts, philosophical insights subtly passed down through generations, gently resisting societal restrictions through quiet intellectual solidarity, subtle resilience softly empowering women's scientific curiosity despite risks. Gently revisit medieval royal chambers softly illuminated by candlelight, queens quietly patronizing scientific endeavors, subtle intellectual influence gently reshaping medieval courts through discreet support, quiet encouragement subtly validating women scholars despite societal skepticism, gently reshaping medieval intellectual landscapes through subtle yet profound influence. Quietly reflect on medieval libraries, softly preserving subtle scientific manuscripts, texts quietly authored or influenced by women scholars gently enduring centuries of neglect, subtly reshaping historical understanding through patient preservation, careful rediscovery softly illuminating forgotten intellectual voices, gently reshaping medieval science despite societal barriers. Gently recall quirky medieval fringe sciences softly explored by women scholars, astrology, herbal folklore, dream interpretation quietly validating subtle intellectual curiosity, gentle experimentation softly thriving beyond rigid academic rules, subtly reshaping medieval science through intuitive exploration, quiet experimentation gently advancing knowledge despite societal suspicion. Softly revisit scholarly halls quietly debating medieval women's scientific contributions, historians gently reconstructing subtle intellectual legacies carefully pieced together from fragmented manuscripts, anonymous annotations, quiet historical clues, subtly reshaping historical understanding, through patient inquiry, gentle reinterpretations softly validating women's intellectual courage, despite fragmented evidence. Remember quietly modern laboratories softly echoing medieval women's subtle scientific contributions. Herbal medicine, midwifery, astronomy, holistic care, quietly preserving gentle medieval traditions, subtly validated through careful experimentation. Quiet resilience softly influencing contemporary scientific practices, gently shaped by medieval women's intellectual courage, despite historical neglect. Now gently slowing tonight's journey, you softly honor forgotten medieval women scientists, quiet heroines subtly reshaping history's intellectual tapestry despite neglect or dismissal. Their quiet courage gently reminds you true heroism often whispers softly, quietly reshaping knowledge through patient curiosity, gentle experimentation, subtle resilience softly enduring despite historical barriers. Imagine softly standing beneath starlit medieval skies tonight, stars quietly twinkling, gently illuminating forgotten women scientists whose quiet courage profoundly reshaped history's intellectual landscape. Softly honor their gentle intellectual resilience, quiet bravery subtly reshaping medieval science through patient experimentation, subtle observation, gentle persistence quietly validated despite societal skepticism. Quietly promise tonight never to overlook subtle intellectual contributions gently reshaping history. Medieval women scientists whose quiet courage profoundly influenced modern understanding through patient curiosity, gentle experimentation, subtle resilience softly resonating profoundly despite historical neglect. Gently carry forward their quiet inspiration, softly honoring forgotten intellectual voices quietly reshaping history through patient perseverance, subtle intellectual courage gently enduring despite societal barriers. As your journey softly concludes tonight, gently allow yourself to drift into peaceful rest, stars quietly illuminating medieval women scientists, subtle legacy, softly whispering quiet courage profoundly reshaping history through gentle intellectual persistence. Quietly surrender to restful dreams softly guided by forgotten medieval women scientists, subtle heroines quietly inspiring peaceful slumber, gently reshaping dreams softly illuminated by quiet intellectual bravery, gently enduring despite historical neglect. Rest now gently beneath starlit skies, quietly inspired, softly grateful, subtly honoring medieval women scientists whose quiet voices profoundly reshaped history. Sweet dreams.